Welcome to another All Access episode. I'm here sitting with composer Greg Tripi. Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks, Kaya. I'm doing great. Thank you.
So I love to start off just asking composers, kind of taking a check at their background. So in your kind of early years, talk to me about like your childhood growing up, and when do you remember kind of that catalyst moment when you decided I'm in love with music, and then of course what triggered music as a storytelling device, and how did that turn into a career?
Wow. Well, I've played music since I was a child. I mean, I grew up playing bassoon in elementary school, and it was it took me through high school and college. I went to bassoon camp when I was 14. And it didn't turn me off to the whole experience, even if it was a little insane.
I didn't know there was a bassoon camp.
Yeah, it was special. I was really fortunate that I had a close group of friends growing up who all loved movies and making movies, and even as kids we would try to make movies with VHS camcorders when we were really young. And I just knew that I loved music in the movies, and I'd have like these battery powered keyboards. I'd stick it on my shoulder and run behind the camera trying to play it out the speakers to get it in the scene. And I just assumed that's how you must put movie and music together. Anyways, I studied film and music in college, and then I went and played in bands for a long time, and then went back to college and studied film music and music synthesis. And it's just always been a part of what I wanted to do and what I love. I imagine when I was 10, Tim Burton's Batman came out, and I was absolutely mesmerized by it. I told my parents I wanted the music for Christmas. I was like, I want that awesome music. I don't know who did it or what it is, but I just want it. And bless their heart, for Christmas that year, they gave me a cassette tape with Prince's Batman music on it. I listened to it. I'm like, wait, where's all the horns and the strings and stuff? So it was a good moment to realize that there's songs and film scores, and then I realized it was Danny Elfman's scores what I was talking about, and we sussed it out, and they got me that one too. And that was the switch that turned it on for me. And then all the classical
so
stuff.
when did it become more than just a hobby and an interest, and when did it become a career choice? And I know you were mentioned before we started recording that we're both from the East Coast, and we had to come to that. When did you make that decision to leave Virginia and head out west and turn this into a career?
Oh, well, I left Virginia when I was 18. Then
so that was earlier than that.
I studied music composition, and then I went to Atlanta and played in heavy metal and electronic bands for a long time.
Oh, nice.
And then I made the decision. I studied at Berklee College of Music, and I was very fortunate that I won two good TV music fellowships, one with the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences and one with BMI. So I had these two really amazing opportunities lined up in Los Angeles, and I came here and I worked with Snuffy, Walden, and then Mike Post, and then I went out on my own. And it was challenging, but I'm super fortunate that I had a lot of really good experiences starting out. I worked with a couple of other composers along the way, and then I met Cliff Martinez, and he had been someone who I loved his music so much when I was studying in school. And then we met and just hung out as friends for the longest time, just talking about music and sound design and eating Thai food. And then we started working together a few years later. He just asked if I wanted to give him a hand, and it just worked out so easily and naturally. We just kept doing it. And 15 years later, we still collaborate on things just because it works so well. And having a mentor, it's someone that likes what I do and who I like what they do, and we get along. It makes a big difference in a film scoring career to have someone that I'm like a sponge. I could just soak up all the good knowledge he exudes all day.
He is I love talking with him. And one of my favorite memories when I was in LA was I went to his house. It was to record an interview between him and Nicholas Winding Refn. They were talking, I think, about Only God Forgives, and they were just sitting on his couch, and I was just there, just bearing witness to it, just recording it for Milan. They were going to, I think, put it on the LP, and
Right.
just hearing them too, just talk about their process, and it was, yeah, and I love, and Cliff just has so much insight. Cliff is fantastic. I love him.
When we worked on Only God Forgives, I just moved to Topanga Canyon, where his house was at the
Yeah,
time.
that's, I know you mentioned the Topanga crew of all the composers there. Yeah.
So I lived about half a mile away from his house, but he was in Thailand at the time. So like we had just moved right down the street from each other, and then he was on the other side of the planet for the whole process, and it still worked out fine.
Yeah. So talk about, you mentioned Snuffy and Cliff, and so you know, a lot of composers come up in that route where they collaborate with other composers, whether it's doing additional music or working on their music team. So when you're kind of first coming into like your own and working on other people's scores, what did you try to take from those experiences? Were you in learning mode? Were you just kind of nervous working, trying to make sure that you didn't mess up something, or what kind of, what was that experience like for you, and what did you want to take away from all those jobs?
Well, you know, the job with someone like Snuffy was a little more of an assistant job. I was his assistant on. He had 7 shows at the same time when I started there. Uh, all I was trying to do was not drown. It was pretty intimidating for the first day off the boat in LA, but incredibly generous and, you know, good person to be and learn from. And then with Cliff, it was more, we always just collaborated. It was just one of these things, like all the ideas I had, he was willing to hear them, and his ideas were just flowing out, and I just couldn't write it all down fast enough. So what I was trying to take away was just all this, you know, all these ideas. There's so many of them. And a lot of it was very, you know, new ideas, things I hadn't really had a chance to experiment with yet. Um, Electronic sound design, texture design. You know, when we did Drive together, we had all these new techniques we were experimenting with recording and sound processing, and we're just writing it all down. Like, oh my God, I hope we remember this tomorrow. These are all amazing ideas, and yeah, they worked out. They worked out really well. So I just feel like I'm in a, you know, some sort of film scoring dojo where like every day there's some amazing like bit of fortune cookie knowledge. You know what I mean? Like something you can
Exactly.
glean
Yeah.
off of the experience. Yeah,
Well,
I hope
so
that makes sense.
speaking, yeah, so I mean, yeah, so you had that time, you know, and even though you still collaborate with Cliff, you know, you're now definitely established as your own, on your own voice, your own composer, and I love your music so much. So just speaking generally about your approach, I always like to ask composers the same question because I always find it fascinating what the answers are. Where does the first note come from for you? I know it's going to probably differ from project to project, but on a kind of general topic, like general idea, like what do you typically like to do when you start, when you take on a gig? You know, if you're lucky enough to be there early, do you like to read the script first? Do you like to watch that first cut? Do you like to just talk to the director or producer first? Like, what's kind of the first thing that you like to do that helps generate those first ideas and those first notes to come out of your head?
Personally, I love reading scripts. I like reading scripts because, you know, the whole process of getting from a script to a, you know, a visual cut of the movie is fascinating to me. I love reading it, seeing what it looks like in my head, and then seeing what it looks like when it shows up. And you know, it always gets a lot of ideas going. Sometimes I just think on it for a week. My usual technique is I start collecting sounds, things I think might be good jumping off points. I'll do a lot of sound design on the different synthesizers in my studio, or just sound processing. I also use, you know, a lot of metal drums on my scores. I've got my Pantheon steel Halos, kind of the main instrument I play on my scores. I almost always just do a recording session of myself, recording ideas out, writing phrases, and getting a little collection of melodies and ostinatos together to use. And that's been the process for the past couple movies and TV shows. And then when the video shows up, I start putting things against the picture and seeing what feels right and how it strikes me. And
Is there anything
yeah.
about the picture that really, like, do you look for colors? Do you look at performances? Like, what kind of triggers you? What are you kind of throwing up there to see what sticks? Are you just focusing on the overall story arc, or what kind of textures are you throwing up there?
I look at stuff and I a lot of times I think about like the level of darkness, level of brightness, not in terms of color grading or lighting, but in terms
Emotional
of
brightness.
emotional
Yeah.
emotional gravity. And I tend to gravitate towards things that are a little heavier and darker in their subject matter or style and presentation. And a lot of times you watch the picture and you kind of weight that in your head of how the picture feels, like how heavy is it on your shoulders when you watch it. And then I find material that I think kind of conveys a similar, you know, seriousness, a similar weight. And there are times when you want the opposite. You want something to say something that's not there on the picture. But I think in general, I just watch it and see where I feel like it lives, what kind of like space between light and dark it lives in, and how it affects me. Then I just kind of see what sounds cool with it. And
Yeah.
you know, I spent enough time putting the original palette together. I kind of know where to jump
Right.
off at.
Exactly. So I know a big part of your job is working with directors, and you're there to service the film, and the director is there to hopefully guide you. So I wanted to ask, just on a just kind of a hypothetical sense, if we had like a scale here, I want you to imagine a scale, and you had at one end of the scale is the director that is the most controlling, micromanaging, my way or the highway type person, or on the other end of the scale, the completely hands off, no guidance whatsoever, go do what you want. As a composer, what do you look for? Where in that scale would you prefer to land on for a collaborator and a filmmaker? And I just asked that question because as someone who's not into music, I love to understand what would make a better working companionship, and what helps you do your job the best in that sense is the kind of point of the question.
Well, I think from past experience, the best scoring experiences I've had are the ones where the director wants to be a collaborator. And I mean, I came at this a lot because I love music and because I love making movies. I mean, I really love the process of just creating movies, letting people see them. And part of that is the collaboration. I think working with people, directors. I mean, I love every part of it. I love cinematography. I love, how visual effect artists work. I love the craft services. I mean, it all just fascinates me. And I like collaborating and seeing like bouncing ideas back and forth, and at least in my opinion, all the stuff that I've written that I think is the best or the most effective are the pieces where we've gone back and forth a bit with ideas and shared ideas, and more than one person's ideas make it into it. So I think on the collaboration scale, I don't know, someplace from the middle to the top. I mean, I've worked in situations where they were hands off completely and they said, just send it in. And we did. And it sounded cool. But
Yeah,
I've worked in projects where it was a long collaborative effort, and it really went to another level, I think, because you put that extra time and that extra sharing of ideas into it.
absolutely. Yeah.
I'll say an 8.5.
8.5. Okay. So let's dive into some of your projects. You've composed a variety from different genres and styles, and uh, one of the I think a great thing that score that you did was, of course, for Manhunt, which is an anthology series. You did season one, which was about the Unabomber, and I wanted to ask about approaching that, and how did you approach a dramatization of a real life kind of event that people can go and look about the news and when it happened. A lot of people grew up with that, but that was what, early 90s, and that happened. And so talk about approaching that, and what did you want your score to do for that particular project?
Well, on Manhunt, the showrunner Greg Yatenis was extremely good at letting me just have creative freedom about just see what comes out of it. And I saw dailies and a bunch of individual scenes from across all the episodes. And I had a good few months to just think about it and work on it and start writing ideas out. And I wrote maybe 50 short ideas out. Some of them were to these dailies, some of them were to standalone pieces. And I sent them to Greg, and he started editing with them and cutting them into scenes. And sometimes he'd use them for the scenes I wrote them for. Sometimes they'd end up in a totally different place. And that type of collaborative process is excellent, because you might write something and think you know the perfect place for it, but your director, your editor, your showrunner places it someplace totally different, and it works amazing. And I think a lot of it started that way, where I kind of saw what style, what type of piece they'd use in what type of scene, because there's a lot of action, but there's also a lot of very introspective moments about the main character, Ted Kaczynski, and his reason for doing the doing the Unabombing, and what created that and what created him. And there were some really beautiful moments in the show too, and I wanted to really push that. That was actually the first time I ever used my Halo drum on a score, and they responded so well to it. I was so excited by it. I think the very first piece in the show that opens with has the Halo on it. So, it's this instrument.
Oh,
and
wow.
it's just playing with these glassy pads behind it. And I mean, it sets a tone that I think got me excited about the show and about the possibilities of scoring a show with this instrument. And I felt like a zombie some days, where my hands were just writing and I was sitting back watching them work. I was like, where's all this coming from? And I always felt like it's easy to write music to really good shows, really good movies. It just comes out so much easier.
Yeah, you're just reacting as you're watching it, essentially, right?
Yeah, that show was exemplary. It really was a fantastic experience.
Yeah, and it
And
showed. I think your score was fantastic. I remember when it came out. And of course, it's an anthology series, so I think it continued. I think Harry Gregson Williams did Steph did the second season, but it's an interesting take on that kind of true crime dramatization, definitely. But another project you did that I want to shine a light on that I really enjoyed was Michael Youndy's documentary American Street Kid, which is about the homeless teenage youth in Los Angeles. So I wanted to know what that experience is like, especially since you're living and working in Los Angeles, and I've been there for 11 years, and homelessness is a real problem, housing is a problem, and something as a documentary. How did you approach that any different than a fictitious film? Or I mean, how did you want to approach that musically?
right, they approached me about scoring it because they had heard another film that I had scored a while back called Reach, which it was kind of based on a true story. It used a lot of guitars in it and a lot of these kind of emotive textures and pads, and I think they kind of temped some of it into their movie, and it worked really well. So we had an idea about where to start with in terms of the the palette and what worked well in their film. And it was a good chance to do something that was leaning much more on these kind of sympathetic themes. And it's a sad story, but it progresses into something that's hopeful and has a lot of resolve to it. um there were a lot of songs in the movie also, so it had to pace out and work with a lot of other music. And I've seen the movie in theaters a few times now, actually, and it was a good experience. It played really well. It's a
Yeah,
you
I
come
think
out
so.
of there feeling pretty sad. And
Yeah. I mean, but that's why I love documentaries, because they do tackle serious subjects. And I know some people see film as an escape, but it's also good to be so as a sobering agent, kind of to realize what's going on in the world around you. And I thought that was very effective documentary, and I thought your score really kind of highlighted that exemplarily well. um, well, another film that I really liked was Rememory, starring Peter Dinklage, and I think that was the first time one of the earlier times when I got introduced to your music. So when you're approaching a sci-fi film that's kind of a mystery, kind of acting like a puzzle, piecing together, how integral were you following the edit and the film, and making sure that your music was pushing that narrative to where it needed to be for that kind of, the third act and everything?
Yeah, we spent a long time working on that. It went through several iterations of the edit, and I started early on with it. And um, yeah, Mark Polanski, the director, had a really great idea in mind about where he wanted to go with the music and the score. And I gave him lots of ideas. Sometimes we do multiple options for the same scene, and he'd really kind of find the right tone for it. And we recorded the orchestra in Macedonia, I believe, and just tried to really make it get bigger and bigger as the movie went along, so that it starts off at a very kind of intimate small place and it gets to this big sound at the end. But so much of the movie also is about a synth score and these kind of personal memories and moments. And one of the things he pitched the movie to me as was that there's this device that can watch your memories, relive your memories on a device that has these little glass memory chips that you put into it. So there's this cool kind of jumping off point of like, wow, that's a novel idea. And I'm like, well, we could put some glass into the score, and some repeating looping ideas that kind of symbolize the idea of like memories, and they're stored on glass. So my parents had just given me a set of wine glasses that all have these laser etchings of pitches on them. So you pour wine up to this point, it's an A, you pour up to here, it's C. And so I recorded all the wine glasses, and those kind of became the foundation of the score. And then I had a whole set of instruments designed to sound like machines, and the strings. And Peter Dinklage introduced me to his brother Jonathan, who's an amazing violin player. He's a touring musician, and he was super eager to contribute to the score. And I had him
really cool.
play a bunch of violin solos for me, and he plays all the violin solos on the score, and it was a great collaboration. And yeah, it's just such a good experience, like working with all these people. It all came together so easily. It took a while, but it just came together really nicely at the end. And yeah, I'm glad you like that one.
I like that one a lot. I thought it was really cool. And then of course I see the poster behind you for Ma, which I thought was also great, with Octavia Spencer. Talk about scoring like that. I mean, as a horror thriller like that, that's very kind of performance based. She's a powerhouse of an actress. Does that change the way you approach a score at all? Are you drawing from her performance a lot more than, say, something that's a little bit more concept based or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was such a cool movie when I first saw it. It was already in such a great shape. We knew that the movie was going to have some horror aspects of it, but we knew it was also going to be a real study of like the character of like what happened as a child and how it turned her into how it turned her into how she is as an adult. And so there was this idea that there'd be these nostalgic childhood moments that needed maybe one type of score, and then these screw loose as an adult moments that needed a very different type. And then there's the horrific kind of ending that was going to really push into a different genre. And so approaching it kind of, we knew it needed to have different types of score throughout it, different types of function differently for different times of her life. And Tate Taylor, the director, had a lot of ideas, but he let me go really off my own and just explore it and really push it. And by the last cue of the movie, they just were like, push it as crazy as you can.
That's always a
So,
great note to get.
yeah, they were in here watching it with me in the studio here, and I couldn't even look at their faces watching the last scene because I was so scared they were just going to start shaking their head, and I just turned around, they both had their mouth, producer and the director, had their mouths open, just like, yes, we never knew what it needed to sound like, but that's it. And that's really gratifying, and a good collaboration when you see that they respond well to what you're doing. And yeah, even when we mixed the movie, we turned down some of the fire trucks at the end just so the score could pop out more.
That's awesome. That's great.
So,
That's a dream come true for a composer to make sure you get the score up front a little bit more.
I know, right? Turn down the helicopters, turn down the fire trucks. That's go crazy.
But you mentioned having them in the room there, and I know that a lot of composers go through that when they have to, show their work for the first time. Is that a nerve-wracking experience for you once you've been toiling away at it, and then it's time to present it for the first time? Like, are you ever excited to present it, or are you just like, oh crap, is this going to not go over well?
All the above, yes.
All the above.
I'm always excited to present it,
Yeah,
scared to death at the same time. But
yeah, absolutely. So you have a new film coming out, Warning, which is the recent sci-fi thriller that you scored, directed by Agatha Alexander, and starring the great cast includes Thomas Jane, Rupert Everett, and then of course, I think what's interesting in the film is you have real life father-son actors playing father and son, Richard Pettyfer and Alex Pettyfer. So talk about this film. How did you approach it? What kind of score did you go with, and what were some of the maybe challenges that you encountered along the way trying to get it to work?
well, yeah, when I first started on the film, I just saw the film. I didn't read a script or anything, and I saw a couple of scenes, and it looked. The very first thing you notice is it has a very distinct style. I love movies that have over the top style, and there was a certain rhythmic aspect to the editing, the visual effects, even though most of them weren't finished yet. You could tell that their ambition was to go someplace in a very hyper stylized, futuristic sci-fi vibe, and I just eat that stuff up. It's
Yeah,
my
me
favorite
too.
type of movie, and I get so excited by it. And immediately I was like, I heard all these synth ideas in my head, and I just actually gotten a new synth in my studio, this one, the ASM Hydra synth, and it was really the backbone of that score. Just like, when you get a new synthesizer, you want to explore all the sounds on it. You want to explore creating sounds, and it's such a great impetus for finding a new direction into a score. And learning a new piece of equipment there are so many happy accidents, you can barely keep track of them all. So I just every day was just hitting record and just going crazy for a while. I used my Halo drum on the score also in a few places, and it worked really well with the synthesizer. And they had kind of they had presented the idea to me of using some vocals in parts of the score as well, because I think it's just something they'd always kind of like had this idea for. So I had written this piece that was a 4-part, Ligeti-ish, soprano piece, or four solo sopranos. I try to say that right. And that made it into the score in several places. So yeah, we just came at it. We had all these ideas up front, and it was just a matter of seeing if I could get them all done in time. It wasn't really a long process. And
How long did you have on this one?
about a month and a half.
Yeah, that's short. That's a
And then
instinct there.
right as we were finishing it up, everything shut down last year.
Oh, this is right at the end. This is right when COVID
This
started.
is right at the beginning of 2020 is when I started it. Then
Mm.
everything, right as we were starting to really finish up post-production, everything started shutting down, and it caused a big delay in finishing it. But it gave us some time to really kind of dial in some of the details we wanted to get at, which is great because I had time to kind of clean up the score and really make sure it was the place I wanted it to be at.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
happy it's
that's
really come out now.
I know it's and that's exciting. I think it's exciting to see stuff, stuff that got delayed or had to be reworked. And we're seeing a rush of movies, of course, out in the theaters as well. And but you also have another film, Vandal, coming out, which I think was completed a while ago, right? I think. Um,
Yeah, we finished it right at the end of 2019.
so now it has distribution and it's coming out, which is another interesting story about a graffiti artist in Miami and kind of a coming of age story. How did you approach this one?
Yeah, Vandal is a beautiful movie. I'm so excited that it's coming out finally and people get to see it because it did a small festival run
Right.
and you select screenings. And yeah, it's coming out November 16th, I believe. Um, yeah, so JD Frexia, the director, was a really big fan of Drive and um, the Nick also, and he knew my work on that with Cliff Martinez, and we yeah we met up and discussed it and decided we really liked the idea of using some electronic stuff against the backdrop of like this you know urban graffiti scene in Miami. There's a lot of street artists and graffiti artists and kind of kind of like a coming of age story. There's a love story in there, but also just some really crazy visual stuff.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
put so much work into this movie and making these beautiful graffiti murals that, yeah, the whole thing is a visual just accomplishment that's so cool to look at. And again, you see awesome movies like this and it's so easy just to want to write music. The synth score, I just felt like I had the blueprint in my mind and it just kind of came out. A lot of it was from Arturia Matrix Brute was the synth of choice on that one, and that really shaped a lot of the pulses and stuff. I played guitar in it. I played the Halo on that one extensively, actually. That there's a few places with Halo solos, and I do a duet with myself on one cue, and there's a lot of songs from artists in that local scene.
Right.
So yeah, it really turned out beautiful, man. I can't wait for people to see this one.
And you mentioned this a couple times when you said you hear the synth sounds in your head, and I'm curious, as a composer that works heavily with electronics and synths, do if somebody can say like, oh, I can hear a trombone, I can hear a flute, I can hear a drum, and people can essentially go, yeah, I can picture that. But since synth sounds can literally be however you can push the machine into what it is, once you have a familiarity of a certain synthesizer, do you you can immediately picture it in your head and where it can go? And how long does it take you to familiarize yourself with a new instrument till you're comfortable and can start hearing it in your head, I guess?
Well, I think when I say I hear it in my head, maybe not specifically a specific instrument, but
Mm-hmm.
more of just like a sound. Like I think a lot of times in terms of how can you go from this simmering soft pulse into like this big screaming arpeggio? How can you make one sound kind of evolve? And I I credit Cliff with really nailing this idea into my head. Is that the scores that use the least number of instruments tend to be some of the best ones. And if you can find that one sound, that one amazing sound that can evolve and change itself, those are the best. So when we did the Nick, one of the unwritten rules that we kind of like tacked up there on the computer was let's try to use one sound in every cue, and let's see how many different permutations of that sound we can use to kind of say, well, this is the one sound, and made a whole 5 minute long piece of music out of it. And I applied a lot of that to Vandal also, saying, well, I've got this one sound. Can I go from this quiet, just energetic pulse behind everybody talking, and then once they stop with the dialogue, it opens up into this thing that is a big animated version of the subtle filtered down version you heard before. So that's how I think about it in terms of like hearing the synthesizer in my head. Is like, where can I pull it back and where can I open it up and really let it just scream and do its thing and then filter it back again.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
I mean, I
So
guess it's not different thinking about like, how can I use a trombone or a violin or
yeah,
I mean, I had orchestral stuff to my scores also when it's appropriate, but there are times like Vandal where it's all about, electronic stuff, and I played guitar and Halo on that score, so it did have some organic elements, just not
right.
orchestral and traditional.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, and I think it works perfectly for the, yeah, for it takes on the film and everything. Your writing was proper for the film and what's right for the story. But I also want to touch on, yeah, I know you released two production library music albums that you featured your Halo drum, and I want to talk about composing production music like that, and I know it's part of a lot of composers' lives and creating production music and submitting them to libraries like that, and you did it for Warner Chappell production music. So talk about the creative process. What kind of what about that is creatively rewarding versus writing to picture and working on a film? And do you tend to have more freedom to really explore what speaks to you, or are you picturing how somebody might use this music down the line and trying to craft it for something, or is it more like coming just what you think what should be used, or kind of you trying to picture it being used by somebody else?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, Warner Chappell Production Music approached me about possibly doing an album based on my Halo. They were familiar with Manhunt and some of the other scores I've used it on, and they just were asking, what about the idea of doing an album with Halo and maybe orchestra? I'm like, well, that sounds amazing, first of all.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what it would sound like or how it would work. So I said yes immediately. And I think we started last January. And, I would get up in the morning and just lock myself in here and just experiment. I'd usually start writing on Halo first until I found a nice, ostinato, something to kind of make the backbone of a piece, orchestrate around it, and then go through an endless process of revisions, editing, changing, arranging, and seeing what happened. And we kind of knew that the purpose was production music, so it needed to live in a certain area of usefulness, useful as underscore, but also have an identity that didn't sound. We didn't want it to sound boring or um, generic in any way, or something that you might have heard before. So there's a lot of freedom there just to experiment and really try to come up with stuff. One of the things that Warner Chappell likes to do is have a concept, and we'd write it down, saying, and we kind of write a concept like you would have, like a pitch for a movie, basically. And I think the concept we came up with was, an astronomer is alone at an Arctic outpost, staring up at the heavens, contemplating the disasters of Earth and the beauty of the heavens. And funny enough, Midnight Sky came out right after we started that, and it sounded very much like the same pitch. And so it's a good reference point. So the music had this identity of being internal to the character. It never really got big. I didn't want to write, action music on the Halo, because it doesn't really sound like an action music thing, but there are some pieces that get
Right.
pretty fast, and it's supposed to be like the internal workings of somebody thinking and scribing and calculating. So we knew that the energy wanted to be this internal kind of a struggle and thinking and toiling, and then the strings were kind of the beauty and the dark kind of moments of it. So yeah, you kind of approach it like a movie that's all in your head, and each piece there are 13 tracks, and it's like, well, this one is going to be this one is more of the montage of the thinking and discovering. This one's more of like the self-loathing and hating one. This is one of like beauty and love. And then it sounded so great. We're just like, let's do another one. So we made a second album, and the second one, I didn't want to use orchestra on it. Also, I wanted just to be the halo and more sound design and ambient and a little bit closer to my film score style. So they complement each other really well. And I think between all of those and the variations of every track, it gives a good kind of palette for underscore, for TV, for film, even some advertising stuff, which I think is what, Warner Chappell was kind of intending also, is that they want to have an artist's sound in their production music, but they also want to have a usefulness to it. They want it to be usable in whatever they use it for. I know what I'd like to see it in, but they have a huge network, so I
Yeah.
don't even know what to end up in. We just finished it. We just got the artwork finished, and the albums are mastered and ready to go.
That's, yeah, I always find production music is such an interesting part, of music composition, and I think a lot of people just either look past it or don't acknowledge it. But I think there's so much creativity that goes behind it, and especially how it's part of this kind of how productions are evolving these days and utilizing production music libraries more and more, and it's just another kind of stem of what a film composition is, and it's just the evolution of it. And I thought it's very interesting. And I know you sent me the promos of it, and it's it's great. Like, I think it's fantastic. So
Thanks. Yeah, for me personally, it was really a dream gig. I mean,
yeah,
getting to write for my Halo and live players and an orchestra, especially last year. I mean, we've kind of talked about this a little bit. It was
yeah,
a challenging year. There was a lot of stuff, man. I was stressed out. I was really I was concerned for my family. I was concerned for the city and the business and the world, and there was a lot of stress and things that were really just overwhelming every day. And being able to come here and just compose what was in my head or what I was feeling that day, it was therapeutic, and it felt good. I wasn't looking at a picture. I wasn't under some TV deadline. I was just composing for the love of composing, and knowing that it had this kind of end product that I was working towards. Gotta tell you, it felt really good.
yeah. And
It was
you can feel the
wonderful.
existentialism through the music too. I know you talked about looking up at the heavens and the skies, and I relate to that stuff completely. So
I hope,
it
man.
was a fantastic
Great.
piece of work there. Yeah.
That's great.
So, as as we start to wrap up, I want to. We talked about earlier your love of filmmaking and how you're not just love of just film music, but every aspect of filmmaking. So I would love to, just as a fun question, if you could do any other job on a film for a day, just to try it out, behind the camera, in front of the camera, whatever, what would you choose?
Oh man, I love cinematography. I think
Yeah,
like guys like Roger Deakins, geniuses. I love really amazing shots of nature, and if I could be the cinematographer on a movie like Koyana Scotzi, I'd be like, God, I'd
perfect.
be super happy. I'd even like be the craft services guy. I'd
Yeah.
eat really great pancakes and calzones, and
Can I assume that you're a Terrence Malick fan then?
yeah, beautiful movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Love
I
the
really like
shots.
movies that have a visual style to them,
Yeah.
no matter what the genre is. I I'm a visual guy. I see these visual, like these really hyper real stylized shots, and yeah, I think it's such a cool way to make movies.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love cinematography, and I try to do photography and stuff on the side, and it's a passion of mine as well. But so for the final question, something, and again, another just fun question. So if you could pretend that the original score of the movie never existed, and no disrespect to the composer or the score, if you could choose any film to score that's been made, what would you choose?
The Fountain. I dare not.
Oh, it's an amazing choice. Yeah, that's great. It's one of my favorite
Yeah,
films.
I cried my eyes out like a
Oh
five
yeah,
in the theater when I saw it. I can't even tell you like how personal and like connected I am to that film.
yeah,
And Clint Mansell's score for it is just so freaking beautiful.
amazing.
I can barely listen to it without getting emotional. So
Yeah.
yeah, the idea of like having a movie that affects me like that, just from like the visuals and the story and the plot, I would love to kind of see what I could do with it. But like I said, the intimidation of replacing a perfect score already is
Of
a little
course.
more than I
Yeah.
can deal with.
It is the yeah one of the most. It's such a beautifully crafted film. I wish Criterion would do like a 4K remaster of that film. It's just like
Oh my god.
one of my favorite Aronofsky's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I, yeah, I think it's gonna. I mean, it's funny because like a lot of people say it's not their favorite one of his movies, but I just look at it and I'm just like, how can it not be? This is
Yeah.
incredible.
It's exactly what the medium was made for. Just, I mean, it's perfect.
Yeah. Well, when they come out with the 4K, you and I can go see it and
Absolutely.
try our heads
Well,
together.
Greg, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you and get a little bit of your insight and talking about your projects. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. That was so fun, man. I really appreciated it. And yeah, it's great talking to you.